I'm really interested in virtual reality and I'm really interested in text. And in particular, I'm really interested in what we can get out of text when we have the ability to sort of locate it within virtual reality. What kind of opportunities arise as a consequence of being able to use the scale, the space, the color, the shading, all of those things that we are used to existing with in the real world, but we don't have the full benefit of being able to leverage when we're reading text in a document, a book, or a paper, be it in a PDF or printed out on a handful of pages. So that's what I'm building here. This is a exhibition hall kind of space devoted to what do prototypes prototype. It was published in 1997 in the Handbook of Human-Computer Interaction, written by Stephanie Houde and Charles Hill. It's a useful reference, not least because it's about prototyping and I like that, but also it's become important enough that people refer back to it. I found this copy, this PDF, 16 pages, on the Stanford HCI website. But it's not important enough, nor is it appropriate for a broad enough audience for anybody to have ever built an exhibition hall for it. There's nowhere that people have deemed it sort of worthwhile to devote a space, nor have they kind of created all of the example materials. But in the context of virtual reality, particularly if we play our cards right with the context of the spatial web, we would have the opportunity and the ability for people to be able to create spaces, environments for things like this, and many others, maybe all of Wikipedia, in a way that hopefully has the ability to be as memorable and as impactful as though somebody had gone to the full effort of creating a museum space, something that you might be able to see in the Metropolitan Museum of Modern Art or the Natural History or the Smithsonian. So this is the article. It consists of 9 sections. It's 15 pages in the original. And they have, in this context, type and type scales that are disparate enough from their smallest to their largest that it's possible from anywhere in the room, more or less, to be able to see the name of all of the titles. You can also see the quantity of the text, if not necessarily read it. And depending on the sort of fidelity of the viewing device, you would have the ability to read text at various scales, and perhaps that could be a feature. This is relatively conservative in terms of the scale of the type, and anything with a higher fidelity display would be able to render it smaller, provided people were willing to walk up to it. But this is the way that the article goes. First, it asks, what is a prototype? It talks about the fact that a prototype, even an Apple Newton, needs to be built by having high fidelity prototypes. Low fidelity prototypes that have perhaps only the dimensions are rendered in cardboard, and even something like a brick can be a prototype. And so that's what we have here. We have a high fidelity kind of industrial model. We have a low fidelity of the dimensions such that people would be able to modify it quickly. And then we have a brick. Unfortunately, virtual reality doesn't currently afford us the ability to be able to lift the brick up and feel its weight, understand what I mean here, but it's a start to be able to see it there. But we go on, and the next thing that happens in the article is that we are introduced to the conceptual model. Here we have a physical model of a conceptual model of the same kind as is presented within the paper. Because this is Blender rather than anything more deeply interactive, I don't have copies of it scattered around, or the original sort of goal of having something that sticks with you as you drive around in the space to be able to kind of place all of the different prototypes on it. But here it exists, and here it exists ornamentally, in a kind of a skeuomorphic concession to the way that an exhibition space would typically be ornamented. But we go on. The article has these 3 examples. They're rendered in the original 16-page article as a couple of small black and white, fairly grainy imagery, photographs and diagrams. But in virtual reality, we have the ability to render them exactly as they mean to be. So unclear what this is, if it's just a drawing. I think it was a drawing. This was also just a computer program, but here we have the ability to think about it as truly spatial. Here, it was an application on a computer. It was actually on this computer. I think it's a Macintosh 2FX. And so being able to see it with its dimensions and the characteristics of it helps you to contextualize exactly what kind of computer it was, what kind of performance characteristics you could expect for it if you're familiar with computing at the time. And then the article continues, and here we get to a blue section. One of the really interesting things about color systems and even color documents is that we have the ability to color pages according to their thematic content. We don't tend to do that too much in article form or in book form, except for textbooks. For some reason, for headier things, for more advanced audiences, we decide that that kind of lifting is no longer necessary, but it's always helpful in the same way that pointing a finger to a page is actually always helpful for everybody in their reading comprehension, and we shouldn't make fun of people for doing it. So here we have the portable notebook computer, the operating system user interface. This was actually made on paper and sketched down, so we have the ability to render it here exactly as paper, rather than assure the reader that it was in its initial form made out of paper. And here we have the knowledge navigator. One of the really interesting things about looking at this in virtual reality, as you can in Blender, is to understand the actual scale of it. There is a video of this on the internet, 1987 publication by Apple Computer, and it's you get some sense of what it is, but because of the limitations of the visual effects of the time, most of the shots of it actually in action aren't deeply enmeshed with human characters, the model who was supposed to be driving it for interactions. And so you don't get a sense of how big or small it is, but when you're standing here in virtual reality, you get to feel exactly what it would be like, what it would have been like to have the ability to use it if they'd ever made it, rather than just build that kind of mock-up. And here, this is the integrated communicator. I think a precursor to the conceptual function of the Apple Newton. You can kind of see a number of the pieces of it, but it was rendered here, actually never functionally, but just as an industrial design model. And being able to see it here in, again, its exact dimensions is really wonderful. But these colors, these spaces, the fact that you can be completely enveloped by the color as you're standing here, it's not impairing your ability to read, but you can feel all of these objects next to you. I think there's something really transformative about that. It gives you something to really reflect on as you think about these artifacts, as you think about the concepts that are being kind of uncovered and gone over, each in sequence, but all contributing to the whole. Again, here we have the look and feel prototypes. Here there's a ball and a walkie-talkie, or a walkie-talkie and a ball. And here is a remote control car in a ball. And here is the pizza box that was carried around by people in order to evaluate whether it would be an appropriate form factor for a computer. It wasn't, as it turned out. It was going to be too inconvenient. But they were able to figure it out, and by being able to kind of stand here, look at the pizza box, really think about what it would be like to carry it under your arm from meeting to meeting, to think about that, the appropriateness there. It's a pretty useful thing to be able to play with. Here are the implementation prototypes. Here is the C code. I wasn't exactly sure what to do with that, but it's there as a piece of paper because it wasn't actually that it ran. It was just that it was presented as though it was the code. But definitely interesting. And then finally, integration prototypes. These are actual computer programs putting it all together. In theory, you would be able to have these fully interactive so that you'd have the ability to see what you do when you press a button or have it undertake a sequence. Another thing to note here is that because this was initially envisioned as a paper document consisting entirely or overwhelmingly of text, there is a lot of it. If this were to be an exhibition, no doubt people would have the ability to cut some of this down or make multimodal use of a couple of different techniques to be able to get the same information across. That's true. It would be better perhaps to use the medium and redesign things, but I think that's also really interesting to think about what opportunities can arise from being able to pull things verbatim, actually make spaces like this for every Wikipedia article, take what you can from them and then put it all in here. Another opportunity is to have it read out to you so that you have the ability to follow it along while you're looking at the articles, the artifacts, to think about what they are as it's being kind of explained to you. Or possibly even have somebody kind of perform it. Somebody standing in front of you, pointing to them, kind of gesturing in the way that you would expect. That stuff isn't difficult either, and if it can't be done automatically, then it can be recorded manually with a relatively low effort once people have a broad range of virtual reality devices to be able to play with. And then lastly, one of the things that I'm really excited about within spaces specifically that have informational meaning is the ability to make use of ornamentation that really has semantic significance. So here, the summary is gold. Here we have all of the points made in parallel. They are sequential in the paper, but they all apply more or less evenly. And then finally, we have the concluding statement, the thing that we want everybody to be able to take away with them when they finish this experience, when they get off the ride. And we have the ability to really dress these things up. We have the ability to put them literally in front of everything else, and we have the ability to put them on plinths, placards, banners of a type that allows people to really understand that this is the point of the piece. And then once we're done, once we've grasped the significance of everything around us, we have the ability to read the information about who mattered for the purposes of producing this. We have the ability to make our orderly way out of the exhibition hall and go on our way. But yeah, I think it's really interesting to be able to have these affordances, these material reminders. This is skeuomorphism at its finest, being able to have a kind of a resting bench, people contemplatively kind of staring at the exhibits like this. But I think that it helps to reinforce what it is that this experience is, what it consists of, how to relate to it. And so I'm really excited about trying out the limits of the appropriateness of these metaphors, creating spaces for information and carrying with us the best kind of points of reference that we have about how we understand media like this in the current forms that we have available to us. So I'm really excited about where this goes, and I hope you are too.